March 10th, 2026. I am John Michael Chambers, jmcbroadcasting.com. This is a special broadcast. Bill Armour, as you well know, joins us every other week in the Global Financial Reset live show. And we had a scheduling conflict last week, but I did not want you to wait 2 weeks to have Bill weigh in on what is going on. Bill, of course, is with Genesis Gold, our premium Patriot partner. Revenue share partner here that help fuel the engine at JMC Broadcasting. We bring the very best to you. And Bill Armour, you can give him a call at 310-407-0239. We're going to get into a lot of stuff. Thank you, Bill, for being here.
Happy to. Thanks for having me on, John.
All right, let's jump into the impact of epic fury on the oil and gas markets here at home. Is this going to be a long situation? Will it adjust back down to the 65 range, do you think? And what kind of an impact, if any, is that having on gold and silver?
Yeah, well, obviously the price of oil skyrocketed as of late. You're seeing, oil barrel over about $100 a barrel. So that is probably going to stay at least somewhat consistent for a little bit while all of this is going on. And, really how long this lasts depends on how long it takes us to root out some of what I would call the cancer that exists in the leadership in Iran. So that will play itself out in time. But one of the things you've seen is gold and silver already rising as a response to that, albeit some of that immediate money has gone into that is intangibles, typically has gone right into oil to chase obviously the rise there, the meteoric rise in oil immediately. But after the kind of immediate intensity of this subsides, and I think once we gain a little bit better control over the situation, the Strait of Hormuz, et cetera, I think you'll see oil creep back down a little bit, and that will go right back into gold. But just as kind of a broader framework for this, gold rises when fear rises. And obviously, war in the Middle East is always going to put people on edge. So there's always going to be a boost in demand for a safe haven asset. Conflict rise, gold falls, gold benefits. This is kind of a trend we've seen throughout history with gold. And obviously, we're seeing that across the board with major markets not really sure what to do or make of this. So you can even take it a step further, because this is going to, in the immediate impact, obviously, anything that uses oil, right? And that could be freight. Basically everything oil prices touch in one way or another. And so you're going to see an immediate price hike in just about everything, an immediate living expenses. So, the Fed here may not want to bring rates down again, which is something we've talked a lot about in the past, but they may be even more unwilling to now, if they weren't already, even more unwilling to bring rates down. So there's even more than just the immediate kind of what meets the eye in terms of how this will impact oil and gas and the world, and obviously gold and silver for the purpose of this conversation. But what I would say is that all of this continues to add to the sentiment that you want something tangible, you want something that cannot be impacted in the same way, like the dollar, like stocks, bonds, et cetera. Airline stocks got crushed as a result of this recently. So you can just imagine, people going about their day saying, "Oh, well, I'm in a safe stock like XYZ airline," and then all of a sudden it's down 15, 20% through nothing they've done themselves. But that is the dichotomy, I think, that a lot of people forget about between something like gold and silver and stocks, bonds, et cetera.
Yep. Good points. You mentioned Straits of Hormuz. President Trump always has counter moves, does he not? All of a sudden, Lloyd's of London's a problem. No, it's not. We'll take care of that. Also, you mentioned, the spike of inflationary spike across the various spectrums because of oil being used pretty much everywhere. The president is reminding Americans, so I'm going to highlight it as well on behalf of the president, if you will. It's a small price to pay for what's being accomplished in that region. And there's more countries to come, but we'll save that for another show. And it won't be long lasting. We know the president's economic policies and will be set straight. But you mentioned the Federal Reserve. That's also a counter move on that. As I understand it, it's May coming up pretty soon that Powell will be replaced, so that there could be a positive shift there. And of course the left and what I call the MAGA, the less grounded and less founded MAGA followers that waffle on every Trump inhalation and exhalation. They're all having a field day with this right now. You know, Trump's starting wars, and now he's got inflation. But you know what? We always will have the last laugh. People need to understand the nature of this war. That brings me
Right.
to this. I'm just curious, Bill. Do you have any update on the status? Last year we reported on the 401k bill that was, as I understood, supposed to go through, the final
Mhm.
stages of the process to be voted and enacted upon, which allowed for tangible assets like gold and silver to be invested inside of 401k.
Yep.
Any updates on that? I personally haven't heard much on that.
Yeah, great point. So, what has happened is effectively that has now been made to be law, right? So that is something that providers have to offer. However, there is not an immediate. It's not like it had to be done today. It's something that they have, a timeline depends on the provider here, but they've got a runway on how long before they have to fully have that available. So it's not like a snap of the fingers and suddenly they have to offer physical metals. There is sort of a period here in sort of in between where they're able to take that and build that out and build out the systems that are going to be necessary for that. So it's coming. So people may start to see that pop up and may get emails about that, from their 401k, IRA providers and whatnot. But over time, you're going to begin to see that probably over the next 12 months or so. I think it's 12 to 18 months. I'd have to double check
Wow.
off the top of my head on the timeline there before it's fully
Okay.
start getting penalized. But who knows? I mean, it's hard to even say what the penalties would be, how those would be enforced, how drastic those would be. So there may be companies that eat the fee in order to avoid offering metals. I mean, that's certainly a
Wow.
world that would not shock me,
Yeah.
given the history of big financial institutions being willing to pay fines to continue to do things that are not in my best interest, your best interest, etc. However, God willing, and assuming that the penalties are severe enough, Trump will achieve the desired effect, which is giving people access to tangibles inside of their retirement accounts, even if they're still working under 59 and a half. Obviously, if you're over that, you've got access to it today. You can accomplish that with someone like myself. But otherwise, even the people that are looking at this saying, "Oh, I haven't been able to do this yet," your time is coming. Maybe not as soon as you'd like, but it is coming.
Great point. I didn't realize it'd be that much of a runway, but you know what?
Yeah.
You just kind of touched on it, but I'll highlight it. Folks, if you're over, if you're over 59 and a half, and it's not a guarantee, every case is a little different. There's the IRS rules, of course, that everyone has to follow. Well, at least for now. And then there's the plan administrators can make their own rules in terms of portability. But so we have to look into it. But no reason to wait a year, year and a half. If you can qualify, in most cases, you can. If not for all of it, at least some of the vested portion, and can roll it. You don't have to wait into physical, tangible gold and silver. So that's something I'm sure you can talk with folks about, Bill. Let's talk about
Yeah.
kind of dovetail right into this. You just mentioning, you know, the greed, if you will, in the paper world, the Wall Street and the central bank world, trying to charge these fees and so forth. They really don't have much more wiggle room in terms of their narrative that you can't be in gold and silver because Goldman Sachs, as you know, and J.P. Morgan has announced and recommended 30%
Right.
of portfolios now in gold and silver, where forever it's been 5 to 15% has been the Wall Street bankers' recommendation, and of course only in the paper proxy. But now, what would you say the reason is that they're having to that
Yeah.
why they've come out on the record and are now saying a more model portfolio is for investors to have 30%, not
Yeah.
5 to 15, but 30% in their portfolios in gold and silver. Why do you think they've come out with that statement?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to at its core, because I don't think anyone's going to argue that it's because they really do, they've suddenly started caring about people and they want to do what's best for everyone. I don't think anyone's going to make that claim. So what I would argue is that it comes from the position of it's become impossible to defend their position of 5 to 15% given the kind of the surrounding circumstances of the world. And so what they've had to do is move that bar a little further up, 30%, let's say as a way to make it seem more reasonable when they say 30%. However, a lot of people here in the space are saying much more than that. But at 5 to 15%, I think any person off the street could go, well, that just seems insane. There's no way that that's enough gold and silver, given what's going on,
Yeah.
given the growth in metals. And so it's kind of like that's become such an obvious lie that they've had to amend that and raise that number there in order to make it a more palatable. Because at the end of the day, they would rather have people move 30% of their money out of the system than 100%, than 50%, than 80%. And so if they can compromise from people, being saying, well, this financial advisor clearly doesn't know what he's doing or she's doing in recommending 5% or 10% or whatever it might be in metals. So I'm going to move everything, let's say. Well, they've started to say, okay, well, it's worth taking the haircut of people moving 20 or 30% as opposed to losing the complete trust of people and then moving the entirety. So I think it's sort of gamesmanship here, and
Mhm.
that's what you're seeing more than anything else, because their end goal is always to keep money in-house. That is the cardinal rule, the golden rule of financial institutions is you don't give money back if you don't have to. And in this sense, that would mean people going to an asset that is outside of their controls. They want money in-house. They want to, turn that over, and keep that in that system as long as they can. That's how they're going to make their money. So it's really just, I would say, gamesmanship. Yeah, is how I would summarize that.
Well, then let's discuss a further gamesmanship move by the deep state banksters of the world. And last time I checked, and I say this tongue in cheek, if you surveyed a big room, if you were doing a public speech and you got 500 people in the room, you say, how many people, by a show of hands, think that Wall Street and the banks have Main Street's best interest in mind? You'd first hear a roar of laughter, never mind
Yeah,
hands going up.
right.
So anyway, that being the case, here's another move they can play. Um, let's shine some light on that. Okay, so they've now come out and said, and it's only because the clock is ticking against them,
Right.
and so they've come out with 30% as the model now. But what's the next slimy little game that they play? The paper world of this, because okay, so now their brokers and their advisors and so forth are, you know, changing the model, putting 30% in gold and silver. But what are they putting it in? Physical or paper? And what's the difference?
Yeah, great point. So one of the games they can play, because again, they've got a whole, a guidebook, a handbook, if you will, of how to keep people in their system. One way is you lose less, but the ideal way is you keep it in the system. You just do it in a funny paper way here. And the way that they're going to do that is through paper shares. That's gold ETFs, silver ETFs, things of that nature. Each of them can be a little different, but they'll all claim, well, we're entirely gold or silver backed. You can absolutely redeem this. And the fine print, as I go through this, every single person that comes to me, and I talked to one guy who said, I actually talked to the CEO of this particular fund, and he said it was completely backed by metals, and I could get my metals if I wanted. And I said, well, send me let me look up the particular fund. And we took a look, and of course, all I did was send the guy the fine print, and in the fine print, it referenced that distributions were. And at a personal basis here, they could decide to or not to issue those distributions of physical metals. And then beyond that, the only people eligible for those distributions would be qualified investors. That's in this scenario, they define the term qualified there as basically banks. And so only banks would be able to transfer the shares for physical metals. And even that, we're talking in excess of, $1 million per transaction. So you wouldn't even be able to get your metals even if you wanted to, regardless of what, a particular fund manager or whatnot says. But they don't want to lose people because they don't want people to realize, to get in on it, that they don't actually have the physical metal. So they're going to offer these paper proxies. These paper proxies can have anywhere from 300 to 500 ounces promised for each physical ounce in possession. So what that means to the average person is that you and 300 or 400 or 500 other people, only one of you of every 300 to 500 people are going to get the actual physical silver when push comes to shove. It would almost be like someone sold you a car and then you said, great, you own a car. You just have to sign up. Everyone gets one day to drive it over the next 2 years. So just pick your day. I mean, it's not really doing you much good. What was the point of buying a car in the first place? And I would make the same argument with metals. What is your I mean, maybe the value goes up in the short term because the metals are going up, paper, gold, and silver is going up. But what is your actual goal here? What's the purpose of buying metals? Well, I would always say, one, it's protection. You want the safety from the paper games that are being played. That's with the market, that's with bonds, that's with anything. And you don't get any of that with the paper proxy in metals. So you lose that. You get, growth, sure, you get some. However, and I know you've touched on this before, John, you get that is completely not a one-to-one comparison. As anyone can look, the spot price of metals, the over-the-counter delivery price of metals, and the actual paper price can be wildly different and can be up or down in a particular day. You can see the fund go down even though physical silver went up. So people kind of trick themselves into thinking, well, at least if it goes up, I'll profit on that. Not necessarily. You can certainly go the other way on that. So you don't get the real possession, the safety, the safe haven on that. You don't necessarily get some of the same gains there. And then the third piece is, and I tie this back to the first, is you just open yourself up. Anytime you don't own something, you open yourself up to a whole litany of issues. So I would just say the physical asset, if you can own it, why take stock in Smith and Wesson when you can own the rifle?
Perfect. So well said. Yep. If you want to buy gold and silver, buy gold and silver. All right. So
Yeah.
what's causing the volatility? We've covered this before, but there seems to be a lot of elements. I've loosely observed that, say, in the past 2 weeks or so, we'll take silver, for example, hit as low as 76 to as high as $92. Of course, we know it's gone higher than that some short time ago. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a range of 76 to 92. I
Yeah.
think close of business for, of course, here in Thailand, 12 hours ahead. But for you, yesterday was about $88 an ounce. So it's also spiked back up from 80. Um, what's causing these wild swings? How long do you expect these wild catapults, rather swings to take place before it catapults into a new range and does kind of trading fluctuations in a higher range?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this isn't the first time we've seen this either. We saw big fluctuations when it first hit about $40. Big fluctuations hit about $60. And obviously now it's at 80. So we're seeing this again. Obviously, it did peak up to 110 or so and came back down, which provides a really great entry point for people. But ultimately, if I were to summarize this very, very succinctly, what we are looking at is an ongoing battle between paper traders and the physical asset here itself. And there's developed a complete price disconnect between the two. Historically, you've been able to look at a futures market and pretty accurately predict, the price of physical metals,
Mhm.
given any given day. And then that's been an assumption that's existed for 100 plus years. This is the first time, maybe in history, where those two numbers are completely either inverted or unrelated,
Mhm.
given any particular day. And so when this happens, the first time this happened, people that are loyal viewers of this show might remember we talked about backwardation in silver and how that was a big deal. And ever since then, we've started this chasm has started to move between the physical asset and the paper asset, the promises of physical silver, and there's been a loss of faith in that. However, they're not entirely disconnected yet. People are still trying to arbitrage that, and a lot of people will get tricked by a paper price into selling prematurely. They'll say, well, spot
Mhm.
price, I'm seeing online, it's this number here, and that's what's got to be worth. And therefore, okay, well, I guess it's, I better offload now. So I think there is some of that. There's probably some profit taking as well. I mean, a lot of people are up, 400% on their silver. So I'm sure there's some people that are, saying, well, hey, this is great for me. But there's also so much room here. I would imagine that over the next, because a lot of these March contracts are going to start coming due, and while some will get rolled, I don't believe most of them will get rolled, and that will put continued strain on these paper traders. So I would imagine middle of March to end of March, we start seeing again the paper selling pressure die off, and the actual physical price start to increase as it's been doing dramatically. So I think that new barometer is going to be silver around $100 in the next 2 to 4 weeks or so. And then from there, obviously, when we've talked many times before, we could see silver at two, three, $100 plus. I know some people will say as high as $1,000 in the near future. I always try to say somewhat conservative here because I understand my position in this. And people should obviously do their own research and their own thoughts and don't just take my word for it. But I would ultimately say that this has been and will continue to be the most bullish I've ever been in at least a short-term period here on metals.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So, switching gears to the dollar. We're talking about, folks, the Federal Reserve note, the fiat debt uh, thing they call money. Um, the dollar, I've seen in the same period of time where I've seen silver at 76 to 92. In these few weeks, I've seen the dollar as low as 96 on the
Mhm.
dollar exchange, maybe low, maybe 94 at one point, which is pretty low. And now it was back, at least a day or two ago, at 99. We also have some wild fluctuations there, and surprisingly going up. What would be the cause of it going up? And of course, folks, we know that that trajectory, as you fast forward and get past these little blips in time, will continue to go down as and then at some appropriate moment, we get that replaced. And we've talked about that on the show. So, but real briefly, what's your take on the dollar spiking back up in value?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of it is just, I mean, broadly speaking here, again, money has to go somewhere. And there's a finite amount of places money can actually go. It can go into metals, so tangible oil, intangibles, basically a vehicle, go into stocks, go into bonds, or it can sit in currency. And with what's going on, the dollar, say what you will about it, but compared to a lot of other countries, it's still not the worst thing in the world. I mean, other countries do a lot of this, have a lot of the same sins we do in that way. They're operated by other banking cabals, just not, the local one that we would understand. And so you're always picking here for a vehicle for your money, at least when I talk, again, sort of systemically, you're picking what is the lesser of two evils. And if you look over at everything going in the Middle East, some people are saying, well, Trump seems to have his hand on the throat of this banking cabal. And so maybe they're going to be a little, I'll say, less bold in some of the money printing operations that they're engaging in. And so there's a trust level there that's maybe developed because Trump is doing what he said he's going to do. And I think maybe there's some people out there that are moving towards the dollar for that purpose. They're saying, well, maybe that sort of the banking cabal that exists in the US and that currency is a better bet than the other currencies in the world that are run by people who really have no idea what they're doing or are bought and paid for. So again, I would say it's a comparison. Now, obviously, the comparison there versus of gold versus any fiat currency, gold's going to win that. But if you're looking at maybe the dollar versus the yuan or something, that might be one where the dollar might win that in the short term. So I think it's a testament to the job that Trump is doing and the pressure that he's putting on in so many places. So the dollar spike back up, you will eventually, I would say just based on everything we talk about on this show, you're going to see that come down because again, it has to go to we have to siphon to a new currency here. But in
Mhm.
the very, very near term, you're looking at options, and this is just a testament to the great work that Trump is doing.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, I think that come the month of May forward this year, we'll see some significant changes in Federal Reserve policy, especially since President Trump, I'm paraphrasing, said Kevin Warsh is a great guy and check him out and so forth and so on. He's going to do a wonderful job for us because it's central casting, end quote. So should be very interesting second half of this year. All across the boards. But to keep it simple, Sam, keep it simple, sweetheart, keep it simple, stupid, as the expression goes. Talk with us about gold and silver. It should not necessarily be looked at, let's say, as an investment or as an income producing asset because
Yeah.
it's not very good at that. But how should it be viewed then if it's not a good income producing asset, if it's not should not necessarily be viewed as an investment, how? This is important to listen up, folks. How should it be viewed? Why should people be acquiring it inside or outside of their IRAs? But what's the best way to position it up
Yeah.
against financial investments?
Yeah. So the way that I always describe this is gold and silver is a vehicle. Its job is to get you from point A to point B. Now, what is it good at, and what place is it getting you across from? Well, think about the analogy I'll give here is think about your retirement. You have to get across a bridge from one side of a lake, let's say, or a river to the other, and you have to make it through that stream potentially without drowning, right? And that would be making it through retirement. Now, if you were on one side and the bridge that everyone else has taken for the last 100 years, there was a sign maybe next to that bridge, and it said, big bold letters, warning, this bridge is now 1% the strength of when it was made. Well, I mean, if you're a reasonable person and you can read, you're probably never, ever, ever crossing that bridge. You're saying, well, there's got to be another way because that bridge has got to fall at some point. So what would you say? Well, maybe there's an alternative way. And you look over, and sure enough, there's a ferry that operates. So you might take the ferry as an alternative mode of transportation there. Now, the reason you have to do that is precisely because that bridge is not a reliable method of getting across that. Gold and silver is similarly. It is here to take you from where you are at now to the other side of retirement without being tremendously harmed or drowning. And because, as we all know, everyone that's watching this program, I'm sure understands, we are in the middle of a massive financial shift. And what you cannot do during this is be the person who gets caught sort of in the crossfire here. So you want to prepare yourself in such a way that it is going to be a safe haven asset, that you are going to have what you have now, and you're going to come out on the other side with as much or potentially more, obviously, as metals continues to grow. So metals growth here, and there's a lot of reasons it will go up and has gone up and will continue to do so. But ultimately, its main goal is as a protective instrument to shield you from what is going on around us. So when people say, well, what is gold and silver if not an investment? It's a safe haven. It is going into the bunker so that when these metaphoric bombs are dropping, that you are not having to check every day to see what has happened, to the market, to the bond market, to your retirement. You will know, and people tell me this all the time. I get a lot of Christmas cards every year, and they say, Bill, I sleep so soundly at this point, knowing that I'm protected. Or I'll get an email that says, I just saw the market. I mean, just this last week, I got a lot of emails. I saw the market, was in the toilet. Wow, Bill, I'm so glad I turned it on, and it moved right past, went on with my day. And people would say before that, that would have been big news for them because they would have been tremendously concerned with, well, what does that mean? Is this going to go down further? Now they understand, and people have a reliability in metals that I think is really, really key here. So it's a safe haven asset, gets you from point A to point B, but it's not necessarily something you stay in forever because I truly believe we're going to enter into a golden age here towards the end of Trump's term when we really are in a position where you may not want so much in gold and silver. But for the time being, while we're in the middle of the battlefield here, you certainly want to make sure that you're in gold and silver.
Yeah, without question. I mean, President Trump is presiding over, one could say, well, many things, but one such thing is, over the dissolution of the Federal Reserve and the IRS as we know it, and thus the Federal Reserve note, what we call the US dollar. So we know ultimately where that is heading,
Yeah.
and we know what we're about to launch into, which we've discussed on the weekly show. So you can ask, I mean, you know, that's a big poster for saying it's time to take a look at gold and silver. Boy, is it time. Anyway, discuss, if you will, from a biblical perspective, just why we often hear people say, gold and silver is God's money, for example. Share some other biblical teachings concerning economic matters, debt, gold and silver as perhaps related to in the Bible and so forth. What are some of the fundamentals that we've been taught in the great
Yeah.
book, if you will, to bring us to that aspect of this? Because it's not just about money.
Yes. Yeah. Great point. And I would start, and I think you headed that off perfectly with it's not just about money. I would start with Proverbs 22:7, which says that the borrower is servant to the lender. And just kind of when we think about why is the Bible saying, why do we talk about gold as God's money? It's because, well, think about fiat. What is fiat? Well, fiat is really, in a sense, it's a debt-based system based on nothing, right? So, or backed by nothing, I should say.
Hmm.
And so when you engage in that fiat system, you are now a servant to the lender in this case, the fiat system. So you become a debt slave in that way, as many of us, if you've done your research, kind of understand this systematically about where we are at in this country. But if you're understanding that, then you can start to grasp why you would not want to be in the fiat system, why you would want to be in a physical, tangible asset, why God would institute gold and silver, something that you cannot create out of thin air. The only thing that was able to create gold was God himself, right? You can't make more of it. You can't take it away. It exists in exactly the same amount, quantity as will ever exist. So that is kind of functionally what has happened, and why God institutes that is because it takes away that greed mentality from people and their ability to corrupt. It's finite. So I would start there. I would also just jump into in Haggai, kind of running right off of Genesis. It talks about silver is mine and the gold is mine, and even talks a little bit about how the land of where gold and silver came from and how it starts. But gold and silver is mine, saith the Lord. So that continues this kind of narrative there that all of the gold and silver is God's, is instituted by God to be used as currency. And I would kind of point out, as I talked about that boat analogy or the ferry analogy, that it also pops up at the very, very tail end of Revelations, in the second coming and all of that, that gold and silver is still at that point, it says they toss their gold and silver into the streets.
Mhm.
But what that tells us is that at that point, people have still been using gold and silver at the very, very end. So what do we have? We have gold and silver used as money at the very beginning in Genesis, and gold and silver used as money at the very end in Revelation. So that's a biblical evidence that we know that gold goes from point A to all the way to Z, no questions asked. So if you ever wonder, does stock make it this way? Does bonds make it? What makes it all that entire way? Does a particular company make it? Even a nation, does a particular nation make it all the way? No one knows the answer to that. But what we do know is that gold and silver starts as money and ends as money, as decreed by the Lord.
Thank you very much, Bill. What comes to mind is a video clip that I saw. I think we shared the still image of it on one of our broadcasts of President Trump's cabinet, everyone in arm in prayer prior to the State of the Union. We've
Yeah.
not seen too many photographs like that throughout these years. We are returning back to God, and boy, in the nick of time. And I see this happening everywhere. Not that I've ever left the presence of God, but even myself, it is so much more a point of priority as it always should have been, or we wouldn't be in the mess this world has become. And so it's a great time to be alive. This dawning of the golden age is not just it means a lot of things to a lot of people. It also, to me, means ultimately, if you really dissect it, returning back to God, and that's what our nation is doing. I think the world as well, for a lot of different ways and a lot of different reasons. But we'll take it no matter which way or which reason. If we're focusing on our eye on the mountain and returning back to biblical principles, obviously we will be better off for it. And so there you have it, folks. Gold and silver. A couple of I know you've covered it in our brief discussion here, but just to leave it with this, what's just bullet pointed out a couple of three of the main reasons, the call to action to be in gold and silver at this particular, especially this time in history. What would
Yeah.
those couple of three bullets be?
Yeah, I would say the first one, and the most obvious one, is we are going through one of the most tremendous economic shifts in history, and not one person knows exactly how that will go. Period, full stop. I mean, well, maybe with the exception of our president, Donald J. Trump. With the exception of him, not a single person knows exactly how that will go, exactly how markets will turn out. So there will be a lot of uncertainty there, and likely, much more likely than not, there will be a tremendous amount of turbulence, uncertainty, and things will get bumpy as they do. And so if we are in the middle of this, why would you put yourself in some of the most precarious positions imaginable, that being stocks, bonds, the paper world, fiat? Why not take a break from that system while this transition occurs? Because, as with Noah's Ark, at any point, Noah could have jumped off the ark if he really wanted to. If it didn't rain, didn't have to get on it. But once it started raining, we know that the ark doors were closed and no one could get back on. So I always say, better to be safe than to be sorry. So that would be my first point here: is let's be safe rather than sorry. Because again, if you get into gold and things end up not as bumpy as we might imagine, then you've lost nothing and you've protected yourself. You were too careful.
Mhm.
Point one. Point two, I would say you've got a tremendous entry point here in a way that people haven't really had. You can get silver today. I mean, according to spot price, it's about $88 as you mentioned. So that's a lot better than that 120 that other people were having to fight and claw and get into. So if you can take advantage of that dip when it returns back to that 120 and you're already up 50%, that's a pretty great place to be. If I told you you could buy any stock here, 50% off today, you'd probably be like, oh, I don't know the stock, but I'm fairly interested. And so I would say, or 30% off, and that's really where silver is right now. And then the third piece here, talking kind of about the metals themselves, the demand for these metals The old saying is buy what the banks are buying. The demand for these metals is off the charts. For silver, largely obviously industrial, but some fiscal use as well, but largely industrial. And we've talked about that in the past. We're on the sixth straight year of a silver deficiency in terms of production versus usage. So that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And then on the gold side, the fiscal banks, that's Russia, China, India, the United States, buying gold at record numbers month over month, year over year for the last several years. So three things to summarize. One, protection, the timing, the safe haven over the coming transition. Two, the entry point. And three, the demand. Those would be the three keys I would say are the reasons here to enter metal in the immediate future.
Thank you. So saving, I say this all the time. I'll close out with this. Saving America and saving your financial picture is not a spectator sport. It requires action. So, we've learned a lot of points here from you, Bill. Thank you. But really, we can't underscore what's happening to the level that it's happening at has really never occurred before. The entire financial system in modern days, as we know it, completely being shifted. And with all the information that you've shared and some of our other guests on the broadcast, it's time for action, folks. So there's three things you can do. Really simple. One, just give Bill a call and buy some gold and silver. That's the quickest and easiest thing to do. And that phone number I have jotted down here is 310-407-0239. Second thing one can consider to do is to give Bill a call just for a consult. You're not ready to buy yet, but you've got some questions to ask that you'd like answered. Well, that's step two, get a free consult with Bill. And step three, for those that have a lot of things going on in, brokerage accounts, annuities, 401ks, IRAs, Roths, income needs, approaching retirement, and whatever the case is, sometimes people have a lot going on in their portfolio, thus in their life, and need additional help. I have a very, very limited schedule, but I can take on about 8 appointments a month. You can visit wealthcoachuniversity.com. There's a mechanism by which you can reach out to me for a private consult. It's coaching and consulting. I don't sell. I don't give specific investment advice, but I used to be a financial advisor. I know what goes on the other side of the fence. I'm over here now. And you can access me if that's something you choose. If you've got a lot going on, you want to get into gold and silver, but there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And you're right about that. I can help you as a consultant. So 3 things, just simply give Bill a call and buy it. Number 2, schedule a consult with Bill. Get all your questions answered so you can make an informed decision that you're comfortable with. And number 3, for those with a lot more going on, you can reach out to me. And ultimately, where am I going to refer you to? My resource network, Bill Armour, income producing assets, Brandon Clark. But the point is, action changes things. Don't be on the wrong side of this unbelievable time in history. I want to thank you, Bill, for being here with us. Any closing comments before we wrap up this brief update broadcast?
I would just say that as you always say, it's not a spectator sport. If this is something that you've heard before, and it washes over you, if you've become inoculated to this, if you will, I would say don't let that be the case. Let this be the one that wakes you up, or at least really chew this over, because this is a historic time in our country. This is not every day. This is not 20 years ago. This is not even yesterday. We are at the precipice, a pinnacle in a way that our country has never been. And that should inspire you to at least think deeply about what you're doing in your life, with your finances, etc.
Very important. We'll end it on that note. Thank you, Bill Armour, and thank you all for following our work at jmcbroadcasting.com. Coming this week on the Global Financial Reset, we have returning guests, Rob Cunningham and retired Lieutenant Colonel Tom Lennox, to further unpack the birth certificate issue. Seems to be a lot of questions about that still. The repatriation of the wealth that's been stolen, and many other current updates from Lieutenant Colonel Tom Lennox and Rob Cunningham. Bill Armour will be back week after this with Will Barney, and for another great episode. The world will change significantly in a lot of different areas between now and then. So we look forward to having you back. Thank you very much, Bill Armour. Thank you all for following us.
Join JMC Broadcasting's monthly Global Defense War Military Panel. JMC hosts an esteemed panel of military experts, including Ricardo Bosi, Tom Lennox, Chuck Sellers, Michael Jaco, Derek Johnson, Brad Wozni, and other military guests. Join us each month, where this panel of esteemed guests analyze the current events across a broad spectrum of topics, addressing the questions and concerns that you have. Subscribe for free by visiting jmcbroadcasting.com. John looks forward to seeing you at the next episode of the Global Defense War Military Panel broadcast, right here on jmcbroadcasting.com.